explore anxiety in this exploration of different emotions. And as always, I'll be doing a mixture of self-therapy in terms of putting difficult things into words, recapping what I've learned and know, and hopefully between the two of us, because the way consciousness comes into being is by perturbation, it's by friction. And so either by putting things into language and considering and accepting, or even better, considering and rejecting. If you're going to reject something, you're going to get a lot more conscious, because this is always the positive aspect of competition. You're going to want to come up with something coherent as the basis of rejection, and in that way you will create friction to become even more conscious than if you just go along with it. So knowing that nothing is perfect, and the more you argue with or reject anything and have the scientific rigor to come up with an alternate concept in your mind in words and cross-reference that to evidence, the more you will learn. Go ahead and reject all of it piece by piece, but do so in such a way that you're adding more distinction, more complexity, more nuance, and more breadth than anything that I say. In this way, you will be highly conscious, and that's ultimately, I think, what so much of this is about. Meaning there's a lot of potency in intention with conscious, complex nuance. You bring that together, a complex measuring and observing device, a clear intention, a clear articulation and understanding of what is observed, action and follow-up reaction, and you've got a very good recipe for improvement. And this flailing around to bring consciousness into the field is not, it's not pleasant, but it can lead to empowerment in a way that can lead to greater pleasure and certainly greater mastery and the satisfaction of that. So let's explore anxiety. So one of the interesting things that I've heard, which rings somewhat true, is that human beings are more comfortable with fear than discomfort. That one of the things that people least like is a sense of being uncomfortable. If they just have to endure pain or fear or etc., they can usually, particularly if they can articulate it and measure it, deal with it. But this sense of undefined discomfort is very aggravating. And we can see this. I don't know if you've ever been driving and there's some little thing. Let's say it's a tiny little plastic bump, or like those little tabs that hold the price tags onto a pair of clothes, and you're wearing clothes and you realize, that's not there. Now, it's quite remarkable the degree to which I, as a driver, will risk my own life to get to one of these little things. The same can be true of changing a song. It's like if I pressed play and I imagined this song would play, and it doesn't play, well, my whole world comes to an end, and I go backward. It's like, okay, I've got to get that screen back on, got to go back, got to go to the menu, got to go back to that other playlist, and this and this. Meanwhile, who knows what's happening with the vehicle? And I come out of these obsessive reveries with this sense of life and death, determination and victory over playing one song that was okay, since it was part of my music, to the other song that was perfect. Now, this is a very, very mild incongruity between desire and expression. But I risked my whole life, and by extension, other people's lives, to bring it about. And knock on wood, I have not been in an accident yet or hurt anyone. But every time I come out of one of these fixations, I am aware of the danger of this reflex, to set out to do something innocent enough and then discover that it's not going the way I thought. And what I understand to be the issue, that is life and death, is not the music. It is a couple of things. Sometimes it's helplessness. So sometimes, I don't know if you have what I call gadget rage, where you just want the damn thing to play like they did in the olden days when you put in the CD player and played, and it played. It didn't say, would you like to update the CD player? You've been outside the CD player for too long, your thumbprint is not reading. Could you enter the password? No, we're still not sure. For your benefit, could you plug the CD player back in? It's like, who the fuck owns this CD player? Me or some idiot in corporate headquarters at Microsoft? I mean, what's going on here? And so there used to be this heavenly day when you just pressed play and hooray, it played. And what tends to get activated for me, I have PTSD, which means that some of the stuff that can be reactivated is helplessness and overwhelming trauma. And so little things get exaggerated. I mean, it's not particularly rocket science. It's simple that if you break a bone and then break a bone in the same place, and then and keep breaking that bone, it's each time it breaks a little easier in that fracture point than before. And so little things over time can become big things. And it's first of all the sense of helplessness. And it's quite intense, this feeling of helplessness, because if it's linked to a biological circuit of life and death danger, and it's got life and death danger and a sense of helplessness about it. Very, very tiny things can plug into that very deep neuronal ravine, where there's this sense that helplessness is something very big that has got to be avoided because it is associated with this life and death series of memories. So this is one area where, for example, the tapestry of all these different emotional patterns are not outlined, they're not clear. And so they're just kind of on the periphery of consciousness, and that's one of the things that another thing that I've heard described associated with anxiety, that's it's undefined emotion. So it's not helplessness and rage and anger at helplessness. Rage, by the way, has a lot to do with powerlessness. And power is all about the ability to act, the ability and the willingness to act and have reality transform in relationship to our intention. And so that CD player that when you pressed play, it played. And there's something very satisfying in the power when you press the button and you didn't press it right because it's a screen, and then it's gone black because it's a phone. And then you press it again because it's a phone. Then you got a few seconds, and then you're driving, and then the thing that goes black again. You start to feel like you're at war with the machine. That there is a titanic force that is aligned against you and I being able to play the song or the recording, etc., that we want to play as we want to play. And then we get in there and the thing says, you've got your external speaker plugged in, and the thing says, you up the volume and you're looking at the road or something, and then it says, you realize it's hardly hearable and you can't hear your own music. Like, what the fuck's going on here? And then you glance down at the damn thing and it says, for your protection, we're not going above upper volume. If you want to if you want to override this thing. It's like, I never use a headset. I'm always using my external speaker. Who the fuck are you to tell me I can't turn up my own volume? And you turn it up. And in that situation, then there's another wave of stuff around all this, which is that, like, even if I look at the intensity that's going on here around this, I'm at a 6 out of 10 in anger and fear, because this is touching. It's triggering and re-triggering, other things. And there's different things going on here I don't control. As I move my arms, the bed moves. The tripod, which is leaning against the bed, wobbles slightly. I see it, and I feel out of control. I don't want the tripod to wobble. So I could put it up here, and then I feel a little bit well, let's see. I could do that. That could be a way to resolve that particular thing. If it works, it feels great. But the undefined anxiety that is always present in a transparent, meaning when I make a choice to just speak as if in a diary, but share it. Why? Because I've always learned the best from people who have been kind enough to do that. Whether it's an individual person or a book, doesn't matter. When someone tells me exactly what's going on in their thoughts, feelings, and why, I learn from it. And I learn from that 10 times more than I learn from, some 10-step or 7-step self-help abstraction. That says something like, when you're feeling anxious, do this and do that. And I think part of that also is what I call emotional co-infections, which is that I'm not always treating one emotion on its own. I'm treating several. So when I say co-infections, when you have pneumonia and it weakens the immune system and then it leads to a flu, and then the flu may kill you while you're in a weakened state of pneumonia and stuff. Or if you have HIV, there's all kinds of things. If your immune system reduces, that then you can die from those things. And so I'm usually dealing with multiple things at once. So there's loneliness, which ties in with not being seen and understood, and to the extent that I'm not seen and understood, or am seen and understood, am not empathized with, which is another form of not being seen and understood. Because most of what we judge as human beings is what we don't understand fully. We don't understand fully. Like, we may understand that someone's making a choice to cheat on their wife rather than be faithful, but we don't understand what I would call the subtext. I'm actually in this kind of category where I'm really sensitive to betrayal, so I'm very fierce about that. So I've never lied to or cheated on any of my lovers in my whole life. And that's 70 people that I've chosen to be clear, conscious, and honest with. Many times in going the extra mile to do so, meaning, I want to behave in a way that I would at least respect and understand, regardless, of how much effort the other person's putting into that. So, for example, if I'm being lovers with someone, I will slow it down a little bit and just say, hey, hang on a minute here. Before we have sex, why don't we define exactly what you desire and expect in consequence to this behavior? What's your desire? What's your expectation? What's your fear? And here's what's going on for me, and let's make a clear agreement. This is an event equals the event, and that's good for both of us, or we don't proceed. Or this is an open relationship within these parameters, but not these parameters. This is what's sex and what is not sex. For example, in many situations, I've had the agreement, no genital contact with the intent to arouse, and that's my full extent of monogamy, that I may kiss, that I may cuddle with, that I may or may not be nude in different situations, but I will not touch another lover's genitals with the intent to arouse them. And that distinction there was, I used to hang out in some hot tub contexts in a clothing optional, really great and respectful environment, and it's just a reality that moving around in those hot tubs, 5 feet deep and 30 feet wide by 30 feet wide, that there is incidental genital contact occasionally. A knee to brushes a penis or something like that, and as you're moving, and there's no sexual intent or agenda, and so so just wanting to be really clear that I didn't break a rule, because this is where anxiety often comes in, like, what's the line? What's okay? I think it's much easier to cross that line if it's not very clearly spelled out. So, for example, my sweetie, who's laying next to me, our boundary goes like this. Kissing is okay on the cheek, but not lips, not wet kissing. If I want to spend time with someone else, cuddling is okay, meaning to our boundary, but it doesn't make her feel well. So there's different gradations. So there's our agreement. I won't make genital contact with the intent to arouse, or genital contact at all, because I'm not in that clothing optional environment right now. And so, for my part, I will not allow a woman to touch my genitals or have a wet kiss. The rest, and for her part, I won't touch her genitals or breasts. And the rest is gray, meaning it's not an agreement. We have our agreement, and then depending on the day and the situation, if I flirt with a waiter or a waitress, she may mind it of like a 1 to 10, and so if I'm getting a lot out of that, we may swing towards flirting that day, or it may be a 7 or 8 out of 10 for her, in which case, if it's not a big deal, I won't flirt at all, or we'll take some space, which again has its gray areas. So basically, it's a clear agreement of monogamy with gray areas that are about the feeling of the day. Now, those do make me nervous because I'm attracted to probably about a third of the female population, number one. Number two, attraction and flirtation is wonderful medicine for depression, and is something that I've been dealing with for some years, is depression. Number four, I love to make people happy, and flirting innocently with other women is the shortest cut to see smiles, laughter, innocence, surprise, curiosity, whether it's with jokes or with gifts or with tips or whatever it is. I love seeing that response. In part, again, medicine for depression. When you initiate a joy in someone else, you get to feel that joy coming back. It comes back, and it's exciting. I often have found that my greatest pleasure is bringing pleasure to someone else and then being intimate with that person while they're enjoying the pleasure that I brought them. Now, that could be sexual, but it could also be creative. It could also be in conversation. It could also be, in a wide, range of environments. And I love that. And so there's yet another thing, which is the concept of flow. When I engage in a new conversation, I often lose myself completely, which means that for a minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, all of my problems just disappear, which in my case are primarily physical and emotional, meaning there's a whole tapestry of different fears and hurts and anxieties and traumas and lonelinesses that are kind of emotionally. And then there's a whole host of subtle and often quite painful regions in my body that express and carry those chronic emotions. And so, like right now, the whole back of my back right here has little threads. They're very, very hair-like threads that are uncomfortably warm. So it's kind of like electric heaters threaded through my muscles and skin. That's so uncomfortable that I'm tensing up to avoid the discomfort, which it goes back to that helplessness thing, that we don't like to feel helpless, particularly as a man. And so rather than being completely relaxed and feeling the discomfort of those hot threads of kind of like fiery energy going through, it's only about 4 out of 10 pain. But rather than feeling the helplessness that I have no idea what's going on around that and I don't know what to do, and I feel helpless going into a medical situation because the last time I brought something minorly complex to my health insurer, she spent 15 minutes with me, which was her kind of legal protocol limit. I felt completely unconfident that I was understood. And she said, why don't you try this and this? And I went and did that and that, having been surprised multiple times by the insurance company about costs. I went to the trouble. I even recorded the phone call and was assured that these 2 MRIs would cost me $50 a piece. Recorded the whole damn thing, had her make a note in it, and then was given a $3,000 bill. Then sent the recordings in and was told, we don't listen to recordings as part of our process, and whatever our agent told you doesn't matter because it's clearly written in your 56-page booklet, which is exactly why I call the person, because I am not going to read the fine legal print of a 56-page booklet to determine. So this is all this very uncomfortable thing. So I'm uncomfortable with going there. I'm uncomfortable with my doctor shouting at me. By shouting, I just mean, hello, how are you today? I mean, we're 2 feet away. It's like, are you deaf? What's the deal here? And then I'm uncomfortable with, her diagnosis. You say, well, how much is that going to cost? And she says, oh, I have no idea. Call our agent. So that's a waste of time. So there's all these uncomfortable systems, and you don't get the sense there's someone really intelligent that either understands what's going on or is going to do anything about it. And then Western medicine around these things has a very dubious past. I mean, it's great for antibiotics in major viruses or a broken leg. It's really quite wonderful. But with these emotional, psychological tensions and things, it's got a very dubious and chauvinistic past that's, with its biggest chauvinism being that if it has to do with feelings, we don't care about it, without acknowledging the fact that within the human condition, most people are miserable more because of the mental, emotional, cultural overlays on their life than the physical substance, me included. I mean, I'm in 4 physical pain right now with this heat map of stuff, but do I care about that as much as I care about the fact that there's no one that I can feel really understands what's going on, that which creates this anxious push-pull, because if I talk about it, people are going to start saying, well, why don't you go have that seen to, which is what? Going through the rigmarole I just went to with the, which is being shouted at, not being able to finish explaining all the details, not having an educated or patient doctor to begin with, recommended into these $3,000 treatments that have nothing to do with the issue, having to argue over the bill, having to argue over the evidence of the bill, and the whole thing is portrayed in this drama as if me, the patient, is a big inconvenience because don't you understand, this is how we do things. The fact that it doesn't work, that we take your money, don't understand you, and don't cure you is kind of irrelevant. This is how we work, and if you were a decent client, you would show up, know everything, and just get well within our stupid protocol, which is absolutely useless, as I've found on several occasions in this type of arena. So do I want to deal with that? No, I don't. But do I feel fully comfortable that I'm taking care of myself by not doing a medical professional thing? Now, this gets into another area of anxiety, because I'm quite vulnerable to wanting to believe that someone will help. But, for example, I don't know a single person who I believe would be able to do something about this for less than $10,000. Meaning, I believe if I took about a month and $10,000, that there's a 50 to 60% chance, maybe 50-50, that I would, within the month and the $10,000, find someone that knew what I was talking about, number one, and number two, knew how to engage with my heart, mind, body in such a way that brought relief that dealt with the core issue. Meaning, I'm sure I could find a painkiller within that period, because I already know how to do that. I mean, like if I do brisk, vigorous swimming, there's about 20 minutes reduced. The endorphins produced by all that swimming override the pain. And so I can say that endorphins can override the pain. When I'm in a state of flow, I forget about the pain. And that's one of the pleasures of doing things like these videos, because, going back to that co-infection thing, and also a lot of my anxiety right now, is I have chronic fatigue, depression, sadness, grief, fear, dread, a memory of recently reactivated trauma that took me to such an edge of pain that I had no idea it was anything like. It was just really, there was just so much intensity of psychological and emotional pain in the day that even laying flat on my back for a month and having 5 hours a day of very good massage and tender energy and kindness, it was just like I had the sense that I was making some progress from either, spiraling off into violence and rage towards myself or others, which since that was the first time in my life I'd felt vulnerable to that spiral from some very deep betrayals. It was unknown territory, and just feeling like I'm at the edge of this vortex and I could get sucked in before I fully understand what's pulling me in and why, just felt terrifying. And so, but it's also exhausting. And so I'm trying to get myself out of that. And it is so, so if I go through a Western medical protocol that is as bizarre and pathetic as the Kaiser protocol that I just described, then I have more depression, more irritation, more anger, which is exactly what I felt. It's like, you fucking assholes, you won't listen for the hour it takes to explain it. You prescribe something, you set up the system where your doctors don't even know how much stuff costs. You won't let me punch in my card and get a clear readout. I have to call and wait on hold. Then they don't have a clear thing. They're not always. Then you don't listen to your own evidence. I mean, it is just so fucked up. And it's like, will I feel safer knowing that these idiots are the people who have looked at this situation? And then I think, $3,000, that's a lot of money. I ended up paying that bill. And it was absolutely disgusting. I ended up paying, and then I get bombarded as if and then I set up, and then I have them do an inquiry and check their own phone voicemail and all that. And while they're doing the research saying, we are going to take 3 months to do this research, I'm getting barrages of bills saying that I'm late. So this is just a complete fuckover. Poor diagnosis, poor protocols, poor ethics, waste of time. And you're going to do this when you're tired and you're not sure if something's going wrong, and it's stressful to drive there, it's stressful to make the payments, it's stressful to talk about it, and then this is the cure, is get a $3,000 bill for this runaround. It's terrible. So I'm divided, and what I'm getting at is how anxiety happens. First of all, it generally has an element of complexity. It often has an element of stuff that's outside of our control. So I could be a complete fool. There could be, this time, there's another doctor that did know what it was, and it would only take $8,000, and I'd be 4 out of 10 less in pain and have more energy. Well, that would be a best choice I ever made. Or it could be another $5,000 run around frustration and absolutely nothing. That seems more probable dealing with Kaiser. Now then I do my due diligence. I read about, the stories of fibromyalgia and stuff online, and they are nightmares. People spending $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $50,000, wasting whole years of their life going from one medical practitioner to another, this, that, side effects up the wazoo, insults, insinuations, blah, 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 blah. And very little benefit, which brings up the feeling then of more helplessness. And I just don't know. I have no idea, what would lead. But when you're tired, you don't want to set off on a 50-50 wild goose chase. Who wants to do that when they're tired? No one. You need certainty, and it's just not there. It's not there on a practitioner level. It's not there on an ethics level. And you cannot, see, this is the worst thing. If you take someone who's on the edge of hopelessness and and frustration, and you run them through a 6-month wild goose chase and waste $30,000 of their money, and they feel worse than that and the other. And you have a kind, loving practitioner there who actually sees you, who understands what you're going through in the entire pattern of absurdity, and validates it every step of the way and says, this has nothing to do with you. You have the misfortune to be born, to the parents and culture that produce these symptoms but don't value the human consciousness state enough to develop the science to deal with this. And you have the misfortune of being born as a man, which means that you're supposed to just pretend it doesn't matter, or you're not a real man, and all this bullshit that you've been laden with. And then you're in a culture that's actually trying to make money on your health as opposed to get you healthy. I mean, it's not designed, it's nothing like what you want. Okay? And you've taken a bet on this, horrible system and given us $30,000 of your money, emotional risk, and and it hasn't paid off, and we are so very sorry. We understand it. We see the absurdity. We're so sorry. That's one thing, because you're not alone, you're not insane, and you are understood and empathized with, which is half of the deal. It's maybe 60% of the deal. But that's not how it's going to work in this fucked up system. I'm going to be run around so that I can 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 be run around by busy people who do not care, who do not empathize, who do not focus on the feelings or want to understand the backstory, who do not want to be present for the humiliation, the disappointment, the frustration, the agony, etc., 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 and who will be judgmental and critical about whatever I do that doesn't fit neatly into their system. They're not there to help me. I'm there to make it easy for them. I'm supposed to fit into this little 15-minute window because that's good for them. It's not good for me. It doesn't matter what's good for me. It's what's good for them. And when I come out on the other side frustrated and all that, not a single person wants to hear about it. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to grieve about it. They don't want to make a container to cry out the tears of grief and frustration. They want me to go away, make some more money, and pretend that I agree with this protocol because this is supposed to be rational science. And the fact that they can't even accurately charge for something is something I'm supposed to understand because, don't I get it, this is a modern hospital with lots of complex systems. Well, I could give a shit about how modern it is. I could give a shit about how complex it is. I give a shit about one thing only. Does it work mentally, emotionally, and physically? And what's the cost-benefit analysis? My cost-benefit analysis of the last sequence, the cost was $3,000, 5 emails and letters protesting the lack of ethics, digging up phone records to show the recording of being lied to, dealing with the helplessness of them refusing to listen to the recording despite sending it to them on a thumb drive because they wouldn't accept email. I mean, just one barbaric message after another that I had no meaning, matter, impact at all. And far from being apologetic, I was supposed to be grateful that I was treated this way, that I spent $3,000 in a month of my time angsting and wasted and got absolutely no benefit. Absolutely none. From once it was 100% cost, zero benefit. From the way it was scheduled to when it was scheduled to the protocol to the way I was talked to, just absolute nonsense. So I'm disgusted with it. But I'm also scared because, going back to anxiety, it's this undefined thing. It's like, how do all these emotions? So I'm disgusted, I'm angry. Doesn't do me any good in this context. The complexity is set up that no matter who I talk to, it'll be an innocent. The doctors are innocent because they're following orders from some fucked up manager that won't take my call and whose name I can't get. I can't even leave a voice message for a senior person at Kaiser because they hide them. Well, who's hiding it? Person I'm talking to. Well, I get angry at her. She loses her job because she didn't do what she was told by the person hiding their own name. So there's just so many layers, and there's no one to intelligently vent this venom to. It's completely insane. And the only person who's responsible, the attorneys and the top owners and the CEOs and stuff at Kaiser, they are the only ones not getting the grief. Not only that, they have written their self-referential system so that no matter at what point I contact, they all say, well, go talk to so-and-so. It should be like this and 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 this. There's no one focused on me. And this is the case in so many areas. And so then the question is anger and fear helpful? Because, if I could punch out the owner of Kaiser, going back to that principle of violence, where violence is helpful when you have an anesthetized power source, i.e., you've got a person, a prison guard, and a prison warden that has complete power over the prisoners, and the prisoners have no power over them. They can't even record the abuses with media because their cameras are taken. And so then you have this tension power where the suffering of the prisoner means nothing to the warden or the guard. But if violence occurs, if something happens that's worth physically hurting the family or of one of the employees of the prison, suddenly they take notice. The power structure of an anesthetized system always takes notice when the pain they are inflicting on the victim gets transferred in some way back to them. They take notice of it. This was the basis of the nuclear race. That basically we can't stop you from just bombing us. But what we can do is we can promise you that you will be bombed 4 minutes later. And so you care, because it's quite likely that if the Russians had not had nuclear weapons and the United States did, the United States would have bombed them just like they did Japan. It's quite likely. And just said, why not? Let's just knock them out, kill 10, 20 million Russians, knock this enemy out and be the world superpower. Well, what stopped them doing it? It wasn't empathy. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't ethics. It wasn't decency. It was fear. It was the vivid imagination of what was going to happen to you. And so this is the positive, role in violence, which in and of itself makes me very, very uncomfortable. I've literally punched one time, like one punch each, in two rather unusual situations in my entire life. I don't like violence. I don't like fighting. I'm not comfortable with that force. And yet, I observe all kinds of sociopathic systems in which I and other innocent people are being hurt by a system that is sociopathic. It is not responsive to the pain that it is causing. And then the question is what to do about that when the system is self-perpetuating, when all the emails written about that don't go to the person who's making the policy. They go to the people who are hired for the express purpose of taking the hit, and they're often underpaid people. It's a very unhappy situation for everyone. It's a very unhappy situation for everyone. So, in this terrain of anxiety, what is to be done? I think there's a couple of things. Number one, to get clarity. What are the emotions present? Number two, what are the different actual problems? To basically make things visible. Number three, what can be done about the actual problems? Number four, what can be done that has a very clear cost-benefit analysis. So it's like, yeah, I could go back to Kaiser, and it's very, very iffy. I'd say that there's only a 30% chance, maybe 20%. There's about a 20% chance that, after another $2,000+ with Kaiser, that stuff could get sorted out in some way. So that's not as great a thing, but something else like reading a book about fibromyalgia, there's a much lower cost. And so, for example, as I'm talking about this, that's my plan. I'm going to look on all Audible for fibromyalgia because I don't like reading. The same reason I'm doing this video with my head down is, it's I don't want to expend energy too much. And so you want to bring clarity to anxiety, knowing that anxiety is an undefined state, and as you define it, it will resolve itself into more clearly defined emotions. Number two, frustration is often evidence of a lack of skill. And so anxiety and frustration usually means that there's a new skill, a new area, something that needs to be learned. And so figuring out what that skill is and learning it is also important. One of my biggest skill anxious problems is the situation of how to have continuity and still avoid certain emotional pockets that I don't know how to deal with. Trauma by its very nature should not be dealt with alone because it is an emotional state in which one feels like one's well-being is in jeopardy, but it's actually, and in that state you need help. You need help to deal with some of, shame, trauma, terror. You need help. And I don't fully have that support in place, which gets back again to the situation of the psychologist that comes see me again in 2 weeks for an hour, as opposed to that's not helping. I've done $100,000 of that kind of stuff, and it does not help. What would help is if you, the fucking lazy psychologist, came into my world and were with me when I woke up and sat with the specific physical, mental, emotional equation of that time and that moment and told me another equation. Now that would help. But of course none of them are interested in doing that because that would be too helpful. That would break the protocol that again has nothing to do with my well-being and has everything to do with being professional, which, who gives a shit? Professional just means you're making money at it. Shouldn't you be making money at it in a way that actually works? Shouldn't that be the basis upon which you're paid? As in the Chinese doctor, you don't pay them when you're sick, you pay them when you're healthy, because they're doing their job. And so this, this is a very complex situation, particularly since one of my therapists is responsible for the single biggest re-triggering of trauma in my entire adult life, which just tells me that neither he nor I had the skill to preclude that, since neither he nor I went into the relationship with the idea of messing me up. And we both participated in that. It's just very vulnerable to start a new relationship with someone else who may, because this guy was totally cocky about it, what a great trauma therapist he is. He knew it was the right relationship for this and that reason. It was completely wrong. So the more cocky someone is, like I absolutely know what's going on the surface, you could say this could be a sign of danger. On the other hand, you want to pay someone who says, I have no idea what this is, but let's give it a shot. In some ways, there's just risks all around. Define things, focus on what has a good cost-benefit analysis. Look at some of the root causes and consider, like, for example, I would say most of my anxiety is related to trauma, so that if I can make a breakthrough in the trauma area, a lot of the anxiety will go down. And so I'm formulating some plans around that. And I'm also not clear because I'm having to navigate and take so many different positions in order to go through all this that it's not at all clear. It's not at all clear that I will come out, that I can pick a thread and stick with it, because it's a little bit like being faced off at gunshot. I've achieved literally thousands of goals, including building my own house on time and on budget. And I'm no stranger to discipline, etc., etc. But these were all in issues where there was no gun to my head. I feel like I'm wandering around in a maze right now where I turn one corner after another and I'm faced with a wall of grief, dread, blood, ice, shame, revulsion, loneliness, and pain, and it's kind of this tangled mess. And so I set off in a healthy direction, and then I'm going along, and then I turn a certain corner in that path, and I come face to face with this wall. And I've got to back off because it's too big, so I go to the left of that wall. Well, now I see a new goal, and I start heading off there, and again, at some point, I'll hit the wall. And so I can't count on myself to have continuity. What I can count on myself to do is, if and when I meet that wall of a combination, it's this aching pit in my solar plexus and my stomach, that I will pivot away from that pain and ache, because it's so overwhelming in its physical sensation and its mental emotional overtones, and it's so complicated that I don't trust myself or anything else or anyone else to deal with it. So this is quite a tangle. And one of the reasons I'm making my way through this blog about the full spectrum of emotions is, starting off with Norman Vincent Peale, Wayne Dyer, Dennis Waitley, Zig Ziglar, and the whole field of positive psychology and attitude and all that. I did not make it through that I learned lots from all of that, and none of that has really helped in this terrain. And so I also so I'm wanting, and none of those mentors talked about any of these emotional states in detail, because the general consensus was you weren't supposed to have these states, which I'm learning is an inhuman absurdity, that these states do exist, and it's just a matter of do I want to own up to them and start learning about them. And the most lonely part of the whole thing for me has been the fact that not a single person wants to listen and dialogue about these states when the states are happening in the way that I have energy and space to do, which, see, like when you've got co-infections, chronic fatigue, exhaustion, different avoidance coping strategies, and anxiety. Anxiety is the surface one. It's not the big issue here. The anxiety is about hitting those deep emotional walls. And so, the trouble with making appointments and stuff and dealing with psychologists is it adds to the anxiety. It also adds to the anger, to the extent that it doesn't work, to the extent that I notice myself getting upset, realizing that just going there and going through the ritual of their protocol is hurting the chronic fatigue. And they don't have, a solution for that. So, so these videos do two things. One, they give me time to talk without interruption. And I highly recommend that, by the way, particularly if you're tired. Talk into a dictaphone or video camera. And I highly recommend a self-facing camera so that you can get to know yourself in a given state. But they also do something else, which is that I feel very kindly towards the literally millions of people that are in some of these states that are also alone, that are ashamed of these states, and that have no one who will talk to them and listen to them. And to the degree that you or someone in this position recognizes yourself in some of these states is to the degree that that I think there's a little bit more camaraderie, and so I always look for these win-wins, and I don't feel like an inconvenience when I realize that someone can press pause or stop or delete without hurting my feelings. But they can also fall asleep listening to my voice, knowing that there's someone that understands and gets it. They can lay flat out on their back, as I've often been, and feel like they're not alone. And so that's really exciting for me, because again, what I hate the most about our culture is the fact that it allows its citizens to be alone and abandoned in this state. And there are numerous cultures around the world that would not do that would not tolerate this. And I think there are more kind and intelligent cultures in the area of emotional, mental, and physical well-being than ours. So, and that's also part of my, part of my exploration around all of this is to, start exploring where I can be and go that gives me this space. So that's the best that I know for anxiety. Take care.